Hello, I'm a designer at Gaijin Arts. Today, I'm going to talk about how to quickly create a mission using our editor. First, let's launch the mission editor. If you've installed the CDK on your computer, load this file here. By default, the location Britain is launched. It's pretty familiar to everyone, so let's change the location to something more suitable. To do this, we need to go to the Scene View Lab. Open the Scene View menu and load another location file from the list. Let's load Wake Island. So, our location is loaded, and now we can go back to the Mission Editor tab. This is the main tab we'll be working with. To activate the free motion camera, we need to press space. After this, we can move the camera in the direction we want using the Q, W, E, A, S, D, and Z, X, C keys, forwards, backwards, left and right. So now I have the location, and I'm going to create a small mission. It'll include a takeoff, destroying bombers, and flying back to the base. First of all, let's add the player's aircraft. Any unit is placed on the map using the Create Unit button. I have my cursor on it now. In the column next to it, we can select the type of object we want to place on the map. In this case, the type is Armada. All aircraft come under the Armada type. So let's place our Armada unit. By default, it's just called Unit. Now we need its properties. We open the properties by pressing the P key, or by pressing the button I have my cursor on now. In this window, we can change the unit's name. Let's call it Player. We can also change its type if we need to. In this case, we don't. The class. In example, the type of vehicle we want to use. An aircraft. In this case, let's use the F4F3, which was actually deployed on Wake Island. We also want to change the player's army. Let's make it the first by default. We can also give this unit a certain quantity. This means, for example, we won't fly just one plane, but one of 4. We'll have a squad of 3 allies. We can split them into pairs using Newman Wing. These are all the properties we are interested in at the moment. So, we already have a player, but our mission doesn't know its player yet. To let it know, we need to go to the Player Team A tab of the mission settings and select the plane we need in the wing line. And just like that, we have a player. This unit will be considered a player. For now, let's save. Missions have to be saved to the game's folder under the User Missions directory. Let's give our mission a title, like CDK tutorial mission, for example. So, we've taken our first steps towards creating our mission. We have a player and we have a mission file. As I said, the first part of our mission will be the takeoff, for which we'll need an airfield. There are several ways to create an airfield in the game. Firstly, we can select a unit from object groups. Like I've just done, place it and set its class as any airfield. All airfields have the prefix DYNAF, which stands for Dynamic Airfield. However, in this case, we don't need airfields. We can delete this one because the island already has an airfield, more than one in fact. All we have to do is define it in the mission. To do this, we'll set it using a zone tool. I have my cursor on them now. We have 4 types of zones in our editor. This is the point, the sphere, there's also the cylinder and the cube. On this occasion, we need a sphere. To create a sphere on our location, we need to choose its central point. Left-click and drag sideways to set its radius. As we can see, the sphere also has its own properties. We can rename it. Let's call it Airfield Start. Here we can set its position in coordinates. We can also set its radius. If we decide that 97 meters doesn't suit us, then we can set it to 50, for example. Now, if we don't like this zone's current position, we can move it using the tools in this part of the panel here. This area contains such tools as Move, Rotate, and Resize, which we can also use to determine the radius of our sphere. These tools are set to the W, E, and R hotkeys. The Q hotkey removes all the gizmos, leaving just the cursor. So, we have one sphere for an airfield. Now let's make a second by copying the first. To do this, we need to select our sphere and use the Move tool. Select any of the movement axes. In this case, it doesn't matter which. Hold Shift and drag it by one of the axes to the other side. Let's rename this zone Airfield End. These zones represent the beginning and end of an airstrip, but that doesn't make it an airfield just yet. To make an airfield out of it, we need to set it in the mission's triggers. Let's make our first trigger. The property window opens up when the editor starts and contains a trigger button. However, we don't just need to make a trigger, but also see its properties. To do this, we press the Properties and Trigger Mission Object Info button. So, now we have our first trigger. Let's rename it. We'll call it Initial. The enabled checkbox means it's activated from the very beginning. If it has any conditions, they'll be checked immediately. In this window, we can see a list of events. The event takes care of the time the event described in the trigger takes place at, or of how often its rules should be checked. These are called our trigger's conditions. As of now, we have no conditions. We can set a periodic event, which means that our event takes place in a second, and now we'll define the event itself under the Action heading. It will all be located here. Our action is called Add Airfield. We indicate the start of the airstrip in Airfield Start and the end in Airfield End. Here, we also need to indicate the width. It's better to make it wider. The army that this airfield belongs to. It should be the First Army, so that the player in the First Army can appear on our airfield. We can also see a line that says Spawn Point here. Spawn Point provides a specific point where the airplane appears. Remember that our player unit consists of 4 planes in total, the player and 3 allies. So, let's make 4 zones so all the planes can appear separately. Here's the first one, which we'll call Spawn Point 01. Let's copy it to make a zone for the second plane in the squad, then the third, and fourth. We add 4 zones to the trigger, which creates the airfield. And save just in case. Now that we have an airfield, we can create the event to cause the player to spawn at the start of the mission. To this end, we'll select an action called Spawn on Airfield. As you can see, we have a multitude of actions. It's sometimes simpler to find the one you need by searching for it in the filter field above the list. Now, we have our Spawn on Airfield action. Here we can specify the name of the airfield. In this case, it's the title of the starting point. We'll also need to specify the object we want to spawn on it. This is the player. Let's make our trigger's start time shorter, just in case, to make it happen 1/10 of a second after the start instead of a full second. In principle, this is practically already a complete mission, in which there's a player and an airfield allied to the player, and in which the player immediately appears on the airstrip. Let's specify an objective for our player. Many of you will have already seen objectives. They are found in many missions. This is the text displayed at the top of the screen. This text is set using Mission Objective. We press the button to create one. There are several mission objectives here, but only the first interests us, Abstract. Just like with the trigger, we can see its properties here, but unlike triggers, objectives have no actions or conditions. They don't check anything. Let's rename it to CDK Tutorial Mission Takeoff. The Enable check means that it will be activated by default. In example, occurring from the very beginning. The Is Primary check means that this is a primary objective. If we remove it, the objective will show up as a secondary objective and be displayed on the tactical map where the secondary mission objectives are usually displayed. So, we have an objective and it's showing up. But we still don't have a trigger for its completion. Let's create a zone which we'll mark as a waypoint for the player. And when the player reaches it, we'll mark the takeoff objective complete. We'll define a point and call it Waypoint 01, just in case we need to create a few more. We'll raise it to about 500 meters. As you can see, when I move anything in the editor, its coordinates change in the top of the panel. We can also edit them directly. In example, set its position to 300 meters up. We can also edit them directly. In example, set its position to 300 meters up. Let's place it above the airfield. Now we need to mark this point as the place the player must fly to. To this end, we'll add the necessary action to the same trigger containing the airfield and the player on the airstrip. It's called Mission Mark as Waypoint, which requires us to indicate a point as a target. A large yellow marker will appear at this point on the mission itself. You've no doubt seen these before. Let's set our recently created Waypoint 01 as this point. It will be visible and primary. This means that it will be displayed on the mini-map and the radar, and that it will blink. If we remove the checkmark from primary, our waypoint loses its yellow point in the center. We won't do that. The Ignore Difficulty checkmark means that this waypoint will be visible even on simulator difficulty. We don't really need this right now, so we have a waypoint. Now we need a trigger which checks whether the player has reached this waypoint. This has to be a separate trigger, since this one will have a condition. Let's call it the Take Off Done. We'll add a condition called Player When in Area. This will check whether the player, we called our player Player in the mission settings, has reached the target, that target being the waypoint. The other settings in this action provide a means to check whether the player flew level into the zone, whether he flew to the point underneath it or above it. 2D is used for this, or whether he is near it. In this case, we'll use 2D, so the player will be credited with completing the mission if he flies above or below the zone. We can also check whether the player is alive or whether he has any other status in this zone. We can also define whether all players must meet this condition or if just one will do. In this case, we have only one player, so it doesn't really matter what we put here. Now, if the player flies into this zone, or above it or under it, we'll take the following action. Firstly, we'll remove the waypoint marker. To do this, we'll use the trigger that places the waypoint again. But this time, we'll remove the check mark next to the visible parameter. This means that the waypoint will no longer be visible. It will disappear when the player flies into this zone. We'll also consider the first objective completed. So we use MoSetObjectiveStatus for this. Here, we need to select the objective itself and its status. As you can see, there are several statuses. We're mainly interested in 2 and 3. 2 is a completed task, and 3 is an unfulfilled task. In example, failed. Let's save our mission. In principle, this is already a finished mission which we could launch, with a takeoff and waypoint the player can fly to, after which the mission would be complete. We're missing a few options before we can launch the mission. The options we need are in the Mission tab. We need to name the mission. Let's call it CDK Tutorial Mission. We need to indicate the level our mission will be launched on. In our case, this is Wake Island. This type is Single Mission. We don't need to change this for now. We can also change the player revival type from Attempts to Tactical Control. But we probably won't do this. Tactical Control allows the player to take the place of any plane in his squad after death, meaning the player will have as many attempts as he has planes in his squad. The campaign is User Missions, which is what we want. We'll make it morning and make the weather clear. That means clouds will be at a minimum. Now we can save the mission and launch it in-game. Let's do just that. So, our mission is in User Missions. As you can already see, the localization is here. In example, texts for the mission. The file of texts is in the same folder as the mission, the User Missions folder. It has the same name as the mission except for the USR at the beginning, and it has a CSV extension. You can see its formatting in the missions in this example folder. It basically looks like this. To provide text for an objective, we take the title of the objective itself and then make a localization for it. The file is broken up into lines. The first line contains a required column with the ID, the text's key. Then there's a list of languages. In this case, they are English and Russian. Subsequent texts must conform to this template. In example, the first text here is the key in required double quotes. In this case, the key is the title of our objective, the objective we made in the editor. Then, after a semicolon, a required separator between the columns, comes the English text. Then comes the Russian text. Here we have all the texts needed to make sure the mission doesn't have any unlocalized lines at the beginning. In example, the mission's title. It must be written after missions. The remaining part of the key is what we wrote in the name field. It must be written after missions \. The remaining part of the key is what we wrote in the name field, which is right here. Date is what was written in the date field. And objective is what was written in the mission objective field. We'll end our short excursion into our game's localization at that. Let's get straight into the mission. We can launch it. Let's launch it in arcade mode. It doesn't really matter. As we see, we've started on the airfield as we wanted. We can see our allies nearby. I'm getting hints for takeoff. Great. And now we can take off. Our allies won't take off until we're done with the airstrip, so we don't have to worry about them. Now we'll fly to the waypoint, and our first objective should be complete. One of our allies has started taking off. I set the waypoint a little too far away, but never mind. There we go. We've reached the zone and completed our first objective. This is perhaps one of the most elementary missions you can create. As you saw, it didn't take long at all to make, but we want a continuation. Join our Facebook group. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter. See you soon in War Thunder.